Hello, I'm going to call the meeting to order. We'll call an alternate, so we have several members that don't appear to be here, so we have each of our alternates, Fred Gianelli and Nancy Hammerstrom seated. Fred, you'll be seated for Marnie, and Nancy, you will be seated for Dave Hallcroft. And most important thing, I want to welcome Nancy to the Planning and Zoning Commission. She's on as an alternate. She's been a regular member in the distant past. And we'll bring an additional perspective. Thank you. Any changes or additions to the agenda, John?
Nothing on my end.
So the minutes of the June 9th, 2025 meeting, any corrections or additions?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion, we accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Second, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Should I abstain?
Probably abstain, you weren't seated at that. And we have no members attending online. Unfinished business, well, we have a public hearing set for July 14th for the application of OSWA LLC for excavation and grading per section 63 of the regulations at 0 Route 6, map 6, lot 25, zone CM1, lot 8 or 10 acres. 10 acres. There's nothing to do on that at this point, but wait for the public hearing. John, any more to bring to bear about that application or its status?
No, I don't believe so. Savannah, there may have something come in last week in support, but I don't think so.
No, I talked to the applicant today and he plans to attend the July 14th meeting. So all is well as good.
Okay, next up, item 6.2, plan of conservation and development. John, I'm gonna hand this over to you. I've read what you submitted and a lot of good information, lot pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Just a clarification. So I'm gonna share my screen. What we basically agreed to at the last couple of meetings was a sort of a broad outline of how we were going to be working our way through the plan of conservation and development. Generally speaking, the commission was happy with the sort of the format and the approach of the current plan that we're updating. So we're largely going to maintain the approach. We're simplifying the table of contents slightly, which I have up on the screen right now. I think there was, around 16 chapters or so in the current plan. We consolidated a number of categories into a smaller number. So natural resources and open space conservation, I believe, would have been 2 chapters in the prior one or the current plan. And then community, cultural, and recreational resources were split up. And I think we can consolidate some of those. And then transportation, utilities, and community facilities were sort of dealt with in slightly different areas, but I think it's neither of those are terribly complicated or too extensive. So we've decided to consolidate those. So we have the proposed plan, and today we are presenting just the very brief section 1, the introduction, and section 3, town overview and existing additions. The introduction, which is the document I have open, is a very straightforward overview of what a plan of conservation and development is, the state statutory requirements for what is required to be covered, what is required to be considered, deals with the statutory requirements. We have a little bit, and again, a lot of this is following closely the sort of the format and approach of the current plan. So a lot of this is it's not really find replace necessarily, but sort of a paragraph by paragraph update or a section by section update about what's changed or what's happening with this section. So some of the stuff in the plan of conservation and development process is yet to be determined, because we will talk about, there's a survey. We don't know how many responses we've gotten, and, we don't know how long it'll be open at this point. So some of those things are still to be determined. It talks a little bit about the survey process. And again, we'll be adding the details on the, the time frame, as well as, talking about the various commissions and stakeholders that are going to be involved. And then we sort of go into the statutory requirements, just delineating the things that the statute requires us to consider, that it requires us to consider, and then also allows us to consider. And again, all of this is basically just a recitation of and simplification of what's in the statute. And then we are just going through just the introduction of the structure itself, following again roughly the outline of the 2016 chapter, and then the proposed format of each chapter, which is again topic overview, the specific discussion of either, if we're talking about open space, we'll talk about, the inventory of open space, the current elements of it, sort of an assessment of where we are, and a projection, and then goals and strategies, which are sort of the broad goals, to make the town greener, for instance, and then the strategies, which are specific action items, require more open space of subdivisions, set aside more money for open space acquisition, that sort of thing. And then sort of detailing the last chapters, which is going to be sort of a land use map and implementation. So, not really that much controversial, not much is going to change in this. Obviously, we'll refine some of the details, but that's essentially the basic introduction. And I'm happy to pause here and receive any questions or comments on that. But this is the least. Yeah.
The current plan, so any questions from the commission about the P O C D?
Nope.
Seems like yesterday we just redid this, and the current format that we have is relatively polished, and I think taking a critical look at where things might have changed that we want to implement, and it is a good incremental approach. It's an efficient approach to it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think it's important that we spend a little time at some point over the next many months reflecting on what's really changed on the spectrum, on the horizon from 10 years ago. What's really different? Just a general thought right now, it's been harder to build new housing. It's just harder from a regulatory standpoint. It's certainly harder from an economic standpoint. Interest rates rising, cost of construction going through the roof. Entry level house is about $700,000 for new construction, and it was probably $199,000 10 years ago. So just reflecting, I think we've been working to address that in whatever way we can, but can we do more? I think is the more important question.
Actually, John, I did have one question. It's kind of a technical question, but because the state did away or prevents local zoning to really get into the discussions around character and town character and doing things to maintain town character. I know that that's kind of scattered throughout the POCD. Is there any legal hurdles that we have to go through just to edit it and make sure that the language is updated, or does that not really apply?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, as you said, the prohibition on zoning using the word character as a criteria for allowing or disallowing development is, I think, a fairly specific and fairly narrow thing. So the town can absolutely, in the plan of conservation and development, describe the character of the community in other ways, but it needs to be specific, so because too often just the vague amorphous term character was used as sort of a weapon. Oh no, that multifamily doesn't fit here. It doesn't fit the character. We're a single family town. It's that doesn't fit our character. But the POCD could very much describe you know, the colonial era architecture, you know, particularly in the town center, or the Georgian style architecture, or, you know, the relatively, you know, modest historic bungalows around Columbia Lake or something like that. If you describe the specific architectural density, the historic heritage, and something physical in the characteristics, that is definitely something that can be then addressed in your zoning regulations. Because you could very well say, listen, you know, this town has a distinct, you know, I don't know, neoclassical architectural vernacular. So it's totally legit for, if we're going to put in design standards in the town center or something like that, that we use, you know, whatever I said, neoclassical architectural vernacular. You know, it's just a matter of defining what you mean by character specifically, and then having your regulations fit that. So then it wouldn't be about, you know, like stopping a multifamily development because you don't feel like it fits. It would be, you know, allowing multifamily development if it had neoclassical architecture and, you know, whatever, you know, a 3 to 4 roof pitch or something like that. It's, you need to be clear, you know, about what you mean by character, so that the regulations fit that. That's sort of a long explanation. I don't know if I really answered.
Good question. Maybe the thing to do is just talk, instead of about character, talk about architectural character, development, density character.
Right.
Mix
It's those elements. You have to define the elements that make Columbia, Columbia. And then you can regulate for those things. You know, Columbia is an agricultural town, so we're regulating our agriculture to fit that character, for instance. You know, it's we're allowing more animal densities and things like that. So it's you have to be specific about what you mean, essentially.
Yeah, as long as it's not undefined, yeah.
Good point. Thanks, Justin.
Actually, I have a question on this. So the section that shows the decline in population for the 20 to
What
30.
page are you on, Fred? Or are there page numbers? No. What?
Chapter 3, under people. Under item D, you're talking about the age group decreasing by 30% for 20 to 34 years old. That's a primary recruitment bucket for the volunteer fire department.
Mm.
So is that considered when you're looking at the expenditures and for the future outlook of the town? Because if we're gonna be losing
Sure.
that big percentage for the prime recruitment by 2040, it kind of increases the chance of potentially having paid supplement to the fire department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that could be considered for the future as well.
Yeah, it's $1 million a year, so that's kind of a big sum.
Maybe one of the questions we should ask is, why is that shift occurring? Is there anything we can do about it if we want to do about it? You know, does anyone know off the top of their head how many students are our order now? Probably 525?
No, it's not that many,
Not that many.
There's,
including pre-K.
I don't know the total number, there's 50 something in the science 8th grade class, I think. So it's not huge.
So it's probably in the mid 300s, and at one time, if I recollect accurately, it was in the 800s.
Yeah, the population took a little bit of a spike during COVID because people were moving and kind of moving around. But the demographic trend has been going down.
So we're gonna probably see another 30% decline from where we are.
You're gonna see some, so if things
Yeah.
trend the way they are, you're gonna see some massive declines in those demographics, and those are the people who are gonna have kids, and then the kids aren't here, and. Yeah, demographic challenges are gonna be tough here if things continue.
Is there, do we in any way need to address, and this may not be a planning and zoning question, probably a Board of Education question, maybe we don't need to even touch on it. And I love that we have Porter School, but could it be more efficient, regionalized at some point? You know, if we have a building that size and there's only 210 students in it,
Well, there has been discussion from time to time about, in the past, about, you know, having the 6 through 8 kids go to ramp, you know, because they have a middle school. I mean, that talk has occurred. It
interesting,
has-
probably not a planning and zoning issue, and I don't mean to delve in where it's not our business, but
Well, I think it's a good point, because, you're talking at the end of the day about demographics and the sustainability of the town. So it'd be interesting, John, to see how those questions weave into the P O C D.
Mhm.
Because I know even right now, having two kids in a high schooler and, well, two high schoolers now, that's a question as to the sustainability of the school and what's the future of it. So planning that out now instead of like, oh, we're gonna put the blinders on until we absolutely have to do something. It's like the fire department question too. It's like, that's $1 million a year expense. And that's
wouldn't
driven
have
by
thought of that.
demographics.
Yeah.
Really good thing.
I mean, cause my background is I spent 15 years in emergency services, and a lot of that was volunteer, also on the paid side.
Okay,
And if looking at the 2040, the 20 to 34 age group is gonna decrease by 30%. And then the over 65 population is gonna increase by
Mhm.
18.5%. Our fire and EMS is volunteer based, we only recruit from residents in town. So if our recruitment pool's dropping that much. Then looking at the fiscal summary for the future, that's potentially a significant increase going out to 2030, 2040, having to pay for that.
that information that's in the report, John, where did that come from?
So this, okay, we've jumped over to chapter 3, which is great because that's the other one that's more substantive. So this is the town overview again, which is, a bunch of basically data. So the estimated distribution in 2040 is from the Connecticut State Data Center, which is now wrapped into, I think it's just called the Connecticut Data Collaborative. The Connecticut State Data Center pre-COVID, I would note, did population projections of all the communities. I think it was just in advance of 2020. It was probably 2018, 2019. They did the population projections out to 2040 by town and by demographic group. It's basically the best guess at the time. It is not to be considered, this is written in stone and this is our, unavoidable fate. A number of factors could change that. And, shortly after these population projections were developed, we had COVID, and that threw a monkey wrench into all kinds of stuff. As Justin said, people were moving out of New York City and into, the more quiet suburbs of Connecticut, and, kids who normally would disappear and go off to, New York or Boston or the South stuck around and lived with their parents for a little while longer and stuff like that. So that shook things up somewhat. But again, nobody's done post-COVID data projections, so this is the best we've got. And so that's, yeah. And again, this is the data we have available. Take it with a grain of salt. Let's put it into the mix with other data that we have available to us.
I've reflected on this, and it really is in sync with what I see on the ground.
Right.
If you're looking for your first place to live after leaving the parents' household, to be general, you can't afford to move into Columbia. You're moving into a variety of other towns. It's way less affordable to make Columbia your first step into home ownership. It's a huge difference in entry-level pricing in Columbia because of scarcities. The prices have just been bid up. I don't know that we can, anything that we've done regulation-wise to this point, I don't know that we've addressed that part of the market. So I can see where we're not attracting that demographic to resettle back into town, whether they grew up here or not. It was just an eye-opener. This is fascinating to me. You have to figure out what to do about it.
Okay. So if I don't want to interrupt any further questions, but I wanted to go into this chapter a little bit because I would like to get a little bit more feedback. And you note, hopefully you can see my screen, you note I've been adding notes from our conversation. So again, the town overview is a lot of data, again, some projection as we discussed. Again, just a basic identification of Columbia's location and its situation. We will be putting some more graphs, maps, data tables and stuff in here. But again, this is the basic information. The previous plan, the current plan, did start with a little bit of a SWOT analysis, and I would like to get into that a little bit tonight if we have time and energy for it. SWOT, SWOT, basically is just a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. That is just a good opportunity for us to kind of center where Columbia is right now, you know, in its progression relative to its peers, things that are going well, things that aren't. And obviously we started to fill this out with cost of housing and reduction in key demographic groups, that sort of things. We'll talk about this in a second. I'll go through the chapter briefly. As you guys have already pointed out, we're getting some of the demographic information. We're 5,200 people, which is less than we were in 2010. As you said, Mr. Chairman, we have sort of a broad demographic shift where Columbia is aging and shrinking. Our senior group is growing significantly. Our younger people are shrinking. And so that, we don't make policy for the schools, but what we try to look at is, what are the other policy implications for this? I mean, certainly having capacity in the schools and recognizing that we've made a major investment in our school system and have excellent teachers, have excellent physical facilities, means that we, could promote the fact that Columbia is open for business and has, if you want relatively small class sizes and attention for your kids in a nice, country environment, Columbia might be a great place to relocate. So there's we can look at those in terms of advantages. And then just going through some of the other data, current educational attainment, employment, just again, these are sort of moment in time snapshots of where Columbia is and who are the people that make up the town. Employment, income data, poverty data. Again, this is all just, dumps from US Census and Connecticut economic data. We talk a little bit about ALICE, which is an important category of income, which is ALICE is asset limited, income constrained, and employed. In other words, it's somewhat of the working poor or lower income blue collar people that we're not talking about indigent, destitute, homeless folks. These are people working that are just struggling. A full quarter of Columbia's population is considered ALICE, which also probably includes a significant amount of senior population because those folks tend to be more income constrained. Although employed, this maybe on the people still working, hanging in because they need to continue to work. There's some data on fiscal conditions and expenditures that we just need to update, with the town's financial folks. A couple of pieces of data that we just need to update, and our fiscal summary. And then we do a very brief analysis of the demographic projections. And again, the aging population will create needs for certain categories of town services, also taking a little emphasis off of the schools, but that could also create problems because as your schools get smaller, salaries don't go down for teachers, and the school still costs the same, the physical facility. So your per student expenditures are going to go up and that kind of thing. So there are implications with these things, and as well as the fact that we don't have smaller household size, housing for retirees, empty nesters, smaller, 1 and 2 person households, and that sort of thing. So it really this is just the data. We'll get into sort of the implications of that in different areas in housing, in open space, in conservation, in municipal services, in sort of the substantive chapters that come later. So I'm happy to answer questions there, but I would like to take a few moments, if we could, and just talk a little bit about some of these, the SWOT elements, so that we can populate this a little bit. And if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair, we can jump in.
And before we do that, just one thing, going back to section 1, I don't mean to derail the presentation made about section 3. I'm assuming we're still going back to, let's see, the way that we're going to reach out to people. Are we going to plan a postcard mailing at some point? I still think that's an effective way to reach every resident in town. I wanted to make sure we were still focused on reaching everybody with a postcard about the process and or the survey. And would we do well to do that earlier in this process to get more people to attempt to fill out the survey? Because I know that the survey only has so many respondents historically, and we're actually doing better this year than in the past.
So, yeah, we put that in, I think we did a postcard last time, which is why this sentence remained, or that phrase remained. I'm fine with it. It's basically just a matter of budgeting, you know, so there's what, 5,200 people. So that means there's probably close to 2,500, maybe 2,300 households in town. So it's just a matter of figuring out where we're gonna pull that cost. But
It's relatively cheap still when you do every door delivery in town.
Yeah.
So we might do well to do a color postcard to try and attract
Sure.
more attention to it. But we can work out the mechanics of that. I assume we don't need to do that between now and 4 weeks from now, or should we get started?
Yeah, no, I'll be in the office tomorrow. I can work with Mark's office and just see if we can put together you know, what are the logistics for it? Because we have the postcard, you know, we have the little flyer that says, you know, Columbia needs your voice, and it has the link and it has the description. So we already have the document. We just need to print it and mail it. So I'll work with him on the logistics of that.
Let's look at whether or not doing a full color glossy printed postcard is within the budget. And if it is, whether we think that's gonna be productive. I'll even leave that in your hands. Is everyone comfortable with that? We don't need to get into the weeds about that, but if pushing it a few more $100 allows for a glossy printed postcard, I think it'll stand out in the stack of, well, this limited stack of mail we'll get now. Less past. Okay. So yeah, back to the SWOT analysis. I didn't mean to derail that. I apologize.
Yeah, not at all. Let me put up the right screen again. So why don't we start with strengths, and Mr. Chair, you can certainly moderate the input on it, but I basically be looking for brainstorming on what are some of the strengths of Columbia.
Well, I think the schools are traditionally strength. I think one thing that we need to add and be cognizant of is especially adding RAM as a high school option. We've got tons of really good high school options. So I think when you look at
Is adding RAM as an option? Is that on something happening now, or something that's potential for the future?
It's done. Yeah, it's ready. So there's freshmen going into RAM this
Awesome.
coming year. Yeah.
I think the lake and recreation facilities, like Rec Park, they're a strength.
The parks and open space?
Parks, the parks and recreation, the lake, are some of our trails. Just recreation in general, I think is a strength in town.
Okay. I'm gonna have to make these all much bigger. Okay.
Low density of our living environment. I mean, I hear that over and over from people. Or what have I said? A traffic jam is 5 cars, and then what the one of the 2 lights we have in town.
Yeah, some advantages to that.
You know, clearly that we have a rural heritage and character. You know, we're not quite as intense a farm community as parts of Lebanon, but it's part of our charm.
Our proximity to 2 different state universities.
Yeah.
Location, 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 location.
Yeah, probably location more broadly too. Hartford,
Shoreline.
yeah,
Boston.
yeah, Providence, I mean, at least not that big.
Okay.
I just had some relatives visiting Charleston and they were very impressed with this area. Thinking like, maybe we might want to come, but sorry, they're older folks, sorry.
You know, if we keep our observations to things that are zoning relevant is important. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful things about the people. I don't know that that belongs in a POCD report. We just going through the last public hearing and regulation changes, the quality of the input we got from the public was phenomenal. We really
Yeah.
have
That's
a wonderful community. Here's one. I think we're one of the most fiscally prudent towns I could imagine. Because of our low debt structure. And the willingness on, larger projects where possible, municipal projects. Where we can do them in-house and minimize the cost instead of outsourcing them. We've got a kind of a traditional Yankee ethos there about keeping a lid on things. And I appreciate that.
Which results in low taxes.
Yeah, but yeah, Bob said, our low tax base. For 95% residential, we have a very low tax base, and a very low tax rate.
Well, we have more commercial development in Columbia than a lot of surrounding towns do, Andover, Bolton. They don't have what we do for
No,
commercial
they
development,
don't,
and their tax base shows it.
but it's only 5% of the total.
Right.
It's not
Mhm.
11% or 12%. I don't see, I
I'm
don't,
just saying,
it's just getting there.
I think the point about the Route 6 and the Route 6 corridor, 66 corridor, where there is commercial land, commercial zoning. It's both a strength and an opportunity, because it's probably not. Could be developed better or expanded, or, there could be more things that happen probably along that corridor. So I think just having that coming through town, not all towns have that.
I think one of the other things too is the regulatory environment in Columbia is steadily evolved in a very positive way, friendly to business, friendly to what do we need for regulation changes to help make this a more accommodating town? I know it's us saying that, but I really feel that way.
It's good. All right, do we want to talk a little bit about weaknesses?
But we don't have any.
Well, I added the one, which I think is, the flip side of low tax rate despite the, high residential percentages, but that also means you're very dependent on your residential tax base. Which is a little bit tricky. I mean, that might be more of a threat than a weakness. I'm happy to consider moving that, but that's, anyway.
No, I appreciate you saying that. We're dependent, a weakness is we're dependent on our residential tax base.
Mhm. Other things, I mean, like no, major in-town employers.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not gonna have a lot of people working in town.
It's got to do with accessibility.
Yeah.
well, we do have some large businesses, car dealerships, several car dealerships, Columbia Manufacturing. An industrial drive, industrial park, there's employment in town. May not be people who live here, but
So that's, I would, yeah. Okay.
I
that's,
would say,
But we are
That's-
dependent. Highly dependent on a residential tax base.
It'd be nice to have some data around that to see. We're talking about how many commuters there are versus people who work in town, or how many local jobs the businesses currently provide. It would just be interesting.
Yeah, just do zip code analysis.
Right.
Of the employees.
Yeah, just to know, is it 4%, is it 5%?
Oh, yeah, please feel free, yeah,
um,
and
more. Okay,
we're not as formal in a non-public hearing format.
more people are working at home. On computer. And one of Columbia's weaknesses is the lack of internet.
Yeah, infrastructure.
Ah.
Infrastructure.
Yeah.
Um,
That's something I'm not familiar with because I have access to 2 internet providers. And get a reasonable cell phone signal in my house, and that's, to me, is,
I do too. My daughter-in-law lived here for 3 years and hated it because she worked from home. And when the internet went out, she was, and my daughter does too. So they have to set up What's that mean?
Backup internet connection.
There's a broader concern or question, I guess, which really gets into, do you have the data, is you are having more people work from home, like I work from home.
Exactly.
So are there areas in town that don't necessarily support that well? You know, that could be a possibility.
So good point, sort of technology infrastructure.
Yeah, just infrastructure.
And. Need it.
One other thing I would point out is a weakness, a lack of availability of any sewers or
Mhm.
municipal water supply to change the development density if we wanted to go down that path. You know, in essence, we're running out of land. Even though there's a lot of open land in Columbia, is it affordably developable? And the answer is, the really good land's been taken for very higher density, economically viable development. And there's always more that'll pop up on the horizon over time as patterns change, but finding viable land to build a new house in Columbia is a big challenge. Big challenge.
So the fact that most of the land that was easy to develop has been developed, and now we're dealing primarily with more difficult sites. Okay.
So lack of, yeah, readily developable land and a lack of the infrastructure for higher density development.
Right.
Whether we want that higher density
This
is a
another
separate
discussion.
question. Yeah, it's another discussion, but that, from my perspective, is a weakness.
Okay.
Other weaknesses,
It's kind of like we touched on earlier, that's the price point, of some of the housing is gonna be the barrier for entry of the town as well. Don't have a lot of affordable options.
we don't. There may be some coming, you know, I've had questions about multifamily development since we passed those regulation changes. And maybe something will come down the pipe. I think we've done a lot to try and address it. Can we do more? Have we opened up the door enough? It's always a question we should probably ask ourselves. Any other ideas about the potential weaknesses of the town?
Rhonda's got her hands raised.
Rhonda?
Hi, thanks. I don't know if this was a weakness or if this is just something, a suggestion to add into the statistics, but I think the statistics about how many people are considered Alice is important. And part of what may be a weakness is that I know the Partnership for Strong Communities, their 2024 data said that there were 17% of the households in Columbia that were what they call cost burden. They're
burden,
spending 30% or more of their income on housing. And that includes 8% that they say spend more than half of their income on housing. So it's just another piece of that Alice. It's not just that people are living paycheck to paycheck. It's that their housing is costing 30 to 50 or more % of what they make. So that's I don't know if that's a weakness or a threat, or if that's just something to put in the data to be aware of, but it certainly, especially when you're dependent on a residential tax base, that really is I think that is a weakness.
Do we have data that would segment that factor as it relates to the percentage of the population that are seniors that might be on that are more income limited? Maybe that shift in demographic is the reason that percentage has increased slightly.
I don't know the answer to that, but certainly can look for that.
As a concept for anyone to reflect on or add to our knowledge base on. We encourage anybody to speak on this, you know, technically this is a zoning meeting, but to be open at this point, I think is the only way we should proceed. I assume everybody's.
So,
more.
yeah.
Well, we're not coming up with a lot more weaknesses for Columbia.
Well, that's all right. So we don't have to do this comprehensively this evening. I'll send this out and, again, with some of our notes and would welcome additional input and thoughts that we can add to this. But
Okay,
I just wanted to get the ball rolling a little bit.
well, we've got to get some of this done and keep the ball rolling. That's really what the goal is.
Right.
I'm wondering if there's a correlation between the 27% that you alluded to and the lack of higher education. It's noted.
You mean,
Well, the
Right now, we're below the state average as far as high school education.
oh, for the demographics?
Yeah, demographics.
Ideally, it'd be great to know per demographic category and break it down that way. To your point, well, actually, both of you, is it seniors that are more moving things one way, or is it the education piece? But then the other, the $1 million question is, how much can you move the needle, and what does it compare to the rest of the state and the rest of the towns? Because, we've always taken the approach that we have to do what we can, especially on our regulatory revisions and stuff. But there's only so much we can do, so.
Yeah. And it's the other thing is, educational attainment is one thing, but if you look at the employment information that's right below, so Columbia is slightly less educated than the state in terms of educational attainment. But if you look at our unemployment rate, it's extraordinarily low. We're somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. So despite the fact that maybe, more people in Columbia are, more working class or less educated and therefore are, maybe more blue collar or less in terms of management, unemployment is not an issue here. People who live here are employed. Could they be more upwardly mobile and educational attainment? Yeah. But again, the answer is probably yes, but that's not something that planning and zoning necessarily has the ability to put its thumb on the scale for.
Could we check that number 66%? Could that be checked just?
Yeah.
Extra, it's correct?
Of course.
So,
Let me.
And Donna,
I move that the lower education rate is a reflection of the very high age the number of seniors is.
Mhm.
yeah, there guys, what you're saying, there could be a correlation, but
I
it's,
think so,
interesting, yeah,
because
that makes sense to me.
in the age group just above me, not many went to college. It's not as that everybody goes to college now. You see, so that would tip it, but not necessarily income, not necessarily employment.
Yeah, one of the strengths, I think, Jane in general, probably not, not necessarily related to this, though, is the blue collar base. Where you've got a lot of tradespeople, you've got a lot of people who are out there really working hard, contributing to the low unemployment rate, and they don't necessarily do that.
Because Columbia is an affordable town to live in. If you're not building a new house.
yeah, this was the high school rate, though, they're saying 34% of not finished high school. And I know what you were saying about the, heavy aging population at the heavier end of the scale. It just still seems. I just wanna double check that number.
Yeah, Don, that number about the people that don't have a high school education. That seems extraordinarily high given this day and age.
Even with the lot of older people in town,
I think
Population,
you gotta have a point.
because the older population.
because of the older population, I guess. As long as we know that it's accurate, double check it.
Mhm.
You can reflect on it from that perspective. Do you want to move on to opportunities?
Sure. So I've added, again, if you, do you need me to make this bigger? Or can you guys see what I've been typing here?
Yes, I can't read it.
You can or cannot?
I cannot.
Okay.
Now I can.
Okay, so for opportunities, I've added finding new ways to assist residential development, schools have the capacity to expand. RAM is a new high quality education option, expanding business tax base along 6, promotion of home-based business, and then regulations to encourage more multifamily. What else we got?
Well, we also have that mixed use zone parcel in the center of town, which may be related to some of this, but I think highlighting that.
Yeah, we probably should call that out. That's not gonna be.
To what? I'm sorry, what about the mixed use zoning specifically?
Well, that we have a mixed use zone in the center of town
Mhm.
is a great opportunity for the town.
We could do more to develop the center of town.
Well, we've been trying,
I know, I'm looking,
that doesn't even give up.
I know, look at Hebron. And it was,
Hebron and their sewer lines, you mean?
I just, what?
Hebron and their sewer lines?
No, yeah, I know they have sewer running through the center of town, but they've done a lot more. Even before that, they had more emphasis on the development of the center of their town. There are more, because I think there's more that we could do without sewers. It'd be great if we had sewer and water through the center of town. We could do even more, but there's still more we could do without it. Potential there.
I think this, well, those are the major opportunities that we have. And
If that's that, we have full rail trails. And they are connected to the East Coast Street. I just sat through a Zoom meeting on everything that's happening there. We have a first-class recreation park. We also have blossoming state park. We have all this opportunity, recreation opportunity. We really need
would you call that a strength as opposed
We
to?
did
an
put that in
opportunity?
strengths.
I think the opportunity is to economically develop along those lines. We need restaurants, we need bed and breakfast, we need Airbnbs, we need a wedding venue, we need restaurants. Oh my God, can't we get a restaurant? You know, people will come
Because of
to
the trails.
use these
Yeah.
trails and these facilities. But they're gonna stay in some other town because there's nothing here. There, you can't eat here except at the Mickey Mouse. And that is strategically located. You can't sleep here.
Oh, come on, go to Columbia Motel.
I rest my, and it's, I got the rest trails too.
Yeah.
But you see, if you,
that.
you see, this is how you keep the rural character. If you build your economic development around what's.
So you feel our recreational infrastructure is an opportunity for development?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's add that. Anything else to add to this? Well, maybe. Anything else anyone would like to add to opportunities right now? Okay. Threats. Phosphorus,
I'm sorry, what? Phosphorus?
yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. I don't mean to
Yeah.
laugh. It's,
One of the biggest threats is if you ask 100 Columbia residents, I would say a chunk of them would say threats to Columbia water quality
Yeah,
and Columbia
right,
Lake.
yeah, water quality, yeah.
Yeah, we're serious about it, and it's not a joke.
Which adversely affects the taxes.
There are cheaper lakes to buy on than Columbia Lake because Columbia is so highly regarded for its water quality. Threats, hard to build. You want to go through those?
Right. So yeah, so what I have so far based on our conversation is hard to build new housing. It's too expensive. Loss of young adults, particularly 20 to 34, creating problems for volunteer firefighters, etc. The aging population requiring additional services, high numbers of ALICE and cost burden households, and then of course the water quality.
Well, threats are the potential for water quality issues. You know, one of the things we didn't put into under strengths is that we have such a really strong lake management committee, and we're kind of a model in certainly the eastern United States, not just the Northeast, for managing a water asset in a proactive way. We really, I know that we regularly get inquiries from other towns with lakes. How did we do this and avoid sewers and not have bigger issues than what we're currently facing?
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and that's entirely, even though we're the vessel for those regulations, it's entirely the lake management and board of selectmen that have driven that process. We're just a facilitator.
So would you consider the lack of sewers and public water systems as a threat? Because we're dependent on people's wells and sewer and septic systems.
Could be another a threat also.
So could you restate that?
It's a weakness. We already identified it under weakness, maybe.
More of a weakness, I think, yeah.
Yeah, let's not call it a threat,
Okay.
but because we're mitigating the threat just barely right now, but we're mitigating that threat. So yeah, leaving it the way it is good, John.
Okay.
So threats, you've identified them already from.
Yeah, and I don't know that, we obviously there's some large existential threats such as climate change and the intensity of storms and things like that. I don't know. I mean, I would think we could add something like that. I don't know if Columbia is sort of uniquely vulnerable, and I'd say probably perhaps we're less vulnerable just because we have some river systems that they're prone to flood, but broadly speaking, we don't get a lot of volcanoes or tornadoes or mudslides or earthquakes or killer bees. There's where it's largely a safe place from a natural resources standpoint. But yeah, broadly speaking, like you just step outside if you dare, heat emergencies are going to get more frequent and things like that. The climate change is sort of that existential threat. Actually, I might put strength like that. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to filibuster
I
there.
don't know. This is a great way to approach it. Just getting it all done.
Oh, what about some of the aging town engineering as a threat, such as Doubleday Road, the failing culverts? Other bridges that just had to be replaced in town as well?
Yeah, that's interesting. Wouldn't have thought of that 4 or 5 years ago, but there's been some
aging infrastructure.
aging infrastructure.
That's very good.
There's some substandard catch basins around the perimeter of the lake that may ultimately impact the lake quality, that I know there's gonna probably need to be some money spent on that. And they're not cheap. Okay,
I have one thought.
yeah,
Our forests are not managed. And they are all the same age. Because of the farms, you know, they all grew back at the same time. So that we have single age forests, which are very vulnerable to climate change. And we have no plan and no budgets or anything planned to manage our forests. So we have just spent a huge amount of money on all the town roads to take out all the ash trees. And all those trees on the side of the road are the same age. And trees have a life expectancy. So that if you don't manage your forests, that is, bring in a forester, make a plan, make them multi-age, multi-level, then the forests are very vulnerable. And they're a big part of what makes Columbia healthy, carbon storage and air quality. And I don't think anybody else is aware.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that may actually be an opportunity, yeah, it could be a threat and an opportunity, but an opportunity for better forest management. Because when you look at like the ash situation, now they're talking about beech trees and other things, that's gonna put a lot of stress on the fire department too, because that's also burning. So,
And the budgets, what we probably budgeted 10 years ago for tree maintenance and management along our roadways versus what we pay now, thanks to climate change and all of that is probably a lot more.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. In my neighborhood, I see trees have been coming down, being blown down by, you know, ravaging windstorms at a remarkable rate.
Yep.
We lost 4 cars in the neighborhood last year, because of trees coming down on them.
Climate change.
Aging trees.
Yes, aging trees.
And that.
yeah, dead trees.
Okay, good point, thank you.
Rhonda has, I don't know if you can see Rhonda, your hand is up also.
Oh, Rhonda, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's all right, thank you. One more strength, I know we talked about the school being a high quality. I think its strength of Columbia is also the library and the senior center that are both really active and have a lot of different services for people. So I think that's a strength.
Pretty wonderful town.
Okay.
All right,
Great. So we'll clean this up. We'll update some of the data that we need to double check. And we'll send this out as a revised version in the next 2 weeks or so. Just so you see that. And then beyond that, we will begin for the second meeting in July, the first of the substantive chapters, which I've already closed that file, will be natural resources and open space conservation. So we'll in July, we'll have sort of our first discussion. We'll rough out a chapter, but we'll have some goals and some policy actions, but this will be, you know, our meeting in July will be an opportunity to kind of do this same sort of brainstorming, but specifically about that category of open space and conservation.
okay, great. There's one thing before we got into the POCD meeting.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
The date of that meeting.
the 14th of July.
The second one in July,
Yeah.
Right, it'll be the second meeting, will be the 28th.
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 14th will be our first one, the 28th our second one. I did forget to bring up the audience of citizens, but we'll get back to that if anyone else had anything else to bring up. So we had, under here, new business election of officers, which we actually don't need to do this evening. And we don't actually appoint Nancy Hammerstrom as the alternate, that was done by the Board of Selectmen, so we did welcome Nancy, and so there is no 7-1 to address. Nothing under regulation revisions.
No, we're gonna have to probably figure out what we're doing with that. The P O C D is gonna probably take priority. And if we get, for whatever reason, they're super busy, we should keep those meetings for P O C D discussion.
I would like to stay on that path, but if any of the commission members or anyone from the public thinks that any of our regulations need some attention, let us know.
Yeah,
You know,
simultaneously.
and if we just take off, bite off one small thing as a subcommittee, we can probably quickly get through it. We bit off a lot, you bit off a lot as the chair of the subcommittee.
We all.
Communications and reports, there was a letter from somebody named Nancy Hammerstrom that we,
Mhm.
it's in our packet.
Yeah, can I just say one tiny little thing before, there's no E in my name. The only reason I bring that up is so that if somebody tries to email or whatever, and they don't, you know, digitally, for digital reasons, it's HAMMAR, which is, yeah, it's very. Thank you, yeah, no problem. I'm not bothered by it, like I said, sometimes it's digital, it can cause problems.
That's okay, it took me a lot of years to have 2 F's on the end of my name.
Yeah.
Nancy, do you wanna speak to that letter at all?
No, I just thought it was just a summary.
Okay,
Can I speak to it a little bit? Sure. Okay. Because it was addressed to me, so Nancy, I was wondering why it was specifically addressed to me.
Because there were comments, those were specific comments that you made, on Facebook, the Columbia page. And so I didn't want to respond on Facebook because I felt like it was going back and forth enough. But I just wanted to just respond to a couple of points about, you know, your frustrations and things like that.
Okay, if I could just grab a couple minutes on this, you know, I'm not gonna like dispute anything that you wrote as far as, but what's important is that if there's questions around my approach to zoning or anything that's concerning to anyone, whether it's in the public or a commission member, it's really important that we have those conversations. I'm totally an open book, and I know there's perceptions isn't always reality, so we need to give the opportunity and the grace to each other to explain our positions.
Right, which is.
And Kristen Locke, who was really involved in a lot of this, with the ag stuff, said something that's really important. We're not asking enough why you feel the way you do, right? So that's important to me personally, and it's kind of strange to have to respond to something that was addressed to me. So, just really quick, the process that we have all gone through with this, and I had a conversation on the record with both Walt and Rick, who are part of the subcommittee that we start these revisions from, was that when we go through the subcommittee process and have an open process and a transparent process, we want to make sure that the 3 of us, when it gets to the point of presentation to the committee, we're not 100% lockstep with one another, but we're close enough to where we feel that we present it to the commission and to the public. So that's important because it's coming not just from a singular person, it's coming from a group and in a larger matter, the public as well, what they're concerned about. So I think that that's important to me. And then you made a comment, just 2 things that are inaccurate in this. I just want to make sure that we clear up the record on. So you made a comment about me not attending an ag meeting, where it was informal and there was conversation back and forth. That was in the midst of an open public hearing. I couldn't legally do that, because I wasn't the only one not there. None of these folks were there either.
But there was a P and Z member there, Holcroft was there.
Well, we can't participate in those when there's an open public hearing. So I would love nothing more than to participate in that,
Okay.
but I couldn't legally do that. Or, you know, there could be challenges to something if I was to participate.
I'm just,
we're not, this is just a commission discussion.
was there, but he recused himself. He did not comment.
Okay.
Yeah, which is,
Because he could be.
right, which is important, so, and then. I believe I'm doing this, but I just take 30 seconds, I'm just gonna read the whole Facebook post so everybody gets the context of it. So I posted, now that I'm free to talk about this, no more public hearing. I want to truly thank all of you who advocated for your right to farm and manage your properties how you see fit. I will continue to advocate for reasonable land use regulations, not no regulations, reasonable regulations. And trust the residents to make their own decisions. You live in a free country, we should never forget that. Thank you for your activism. And then Mary Reutel, there's only 3 responses to the whole thing. As important is the common ground agreement to reach mutual understanding to protect the lake. Both agriculture and Columbia Lake are strengths of our town, completely non-controversial, I agree with that. And my reply, which is where you pulled a quote out of, the quote you pulled out was certain groups of people feel frustrated when the debates around change takes place. And the context that was written in was a response to Mary. And as important, hopefully there's some lessons to be learned about how everyone, not just me, not just one person or side, how everyone approaches these situations and why certain groups of people feel frustrated when the debates around change take place, which was the quote. My hope is that this triggers some much needed conversations in the community, liked and heart emoji by Mary and Muffy. So I think that, listen, we need to have these conversations and we need to understand each other's point of views. And there's gonna be times where we disagree and we agree, but one thing that I am extraordinarily proud of, Rick, under your leadership and with everyone in here, we don't get political, we don't yell and scream and fight. We work for what we feel is right. And we're not all gonna agree, like that's impossible, that would be bad if we all agreed. So I'm looking forward to working with you, but we need to have an open line of communication for sure. And I was very uncomfortable with the letter at first, I was like, why is she, there's like, it came out of the subcommittee with 3 people and the whole thing at the end of the day passed unanimously, like it's, you're giving me way more credit than I'm due.
Would
So.
it been more appropriate had I responded on the Facebook page where this was?
No, it would have, you can do whatever you would like.
I was gonna do that, but then I thought, I don't wanna get into there was some heated stuff starting to build up on it.
Well, those were the, I mean, I
And
didn't see that, but,
Oh, yeah, well, it got going more after that with.
okay, well, cause I pulled that today.
Somebody posted, they had a problem and Kristen Block went back and forth.
Oh, that was a different,
It
yes.
escalated,
Yeah,
and I
that was
didn't wanna
completely different.
I didn't wanna bring it into that fray, but I felt it was important to just make a couple of points about how I feel about zoning. That we can't just trust everybody always, that, we need some regulations in place.
Yeah.
For the times when people go off track. And I think you may really disagree with me on that.
No, I don't, I think
So,
you've made an assumption that we would disagree without talking. When have we ever had an in-depth conversation about it?
we've talked at one of the subcommittee meetings.
I know, cause I made a comment, I know exactly what you're talking about, I made a comment, no, cause I saw your face. I made a comment about something negative about how zoning can go too far or something, cause I do have problems with zoning sometimes, cause it can go too far. I mean, if we don't acknowledge that it goes too far, like we're just lying to ourselves. And I think that he probably took that as, he doesn't want any regulations. So, but I don't wanna make assumptions of where you're coming from, and I just prefer that nobody makes assumptions from where I'm coming from. Because the phone takes incoming calls, it makes outgoing calls as well. So my preference, again, I'm never gonna tell anybody what to do, you have to follow whatever you feel is right. For whatever you put in the record, I don't get on Facebook, then start arguing with people, you'll see that's the only post I made. But. Yeah, we just need to be able to,
And just to clarify, when you said, certain groups feel frustrated, I did interpret that to mean that you felt like your group. That was for the proposal, presented the proposal, that you were the only ones who were frustrated.
no,
And that we-
everyone made it clear that
I
everyone
thought
was
you think
frustrated.
the other side was as frustrated too.
No, everyone was, that was, that, and in that way, that's what made it a good thing, because nobody got it.
Can we say, well, I'm past this? right?
Yeah, we can, yeah, so the overall point is like, this is not the forum for us to have those discussions, but I wanna make sure that the record was clear.
I'd like to leave this topic with one observation, if you don't mind. I sensed a level of frustration from several perspectives. And in the end, we got this wonderful solution that is the result of respect and compromise for each other. And, yeah, and I just, the level of input from the public in the public hearings. I don't wanna tell you I was shocked, because I wasn't shocked. Let's just say I was impressed with the depth of the testimony, the quality of the testimony, the intellect behind the testimony. And it's just a testament to our community. It's who we are as people, that we approach each other. We can disagree vehemently, but we did it respectfully, and in the end, I think nearly everybody got what they wanted because of this openness to listening and compromising. And I wanted to say thank you to the public again for all that. So I think it's an important point to leave this discussion on. I'm glad you bring up whatever thoughts you have, Nancy and Justin. I'm glad you bring up what your perspective is, and it will always be out there. We also had a resolution formalized from Ed Madrick, and I guess the Republican Town Committee will be recommending somebody to be appointed to that vacancy.
Yeah, we've already made a recommendation, hasn't been formalized yet, but that should be well, I mean,
Okay.
soon.
Anything in open discussion, commission? I think we covered it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I'm not sure if this is the right category for it. I just wanted to give a quick legislative update. I don't know if people have been tracking what happened today.
Oh, I'm glad you're bringing this up, and I know what it is.
Yeah.
Governor Lamont vetoed House Bill 5002, which was the significant sort of omnibus housing zoning reform law that was passed in both houses. There was a lot of agita expressed at a municipal leadership level. Cost and CCM both were burning up the governor's phone lines about this, feeling like the proposed law went too far in terms of placing burdens on municipalities for planning or providing for affordable housing. I tend to disagree with that, and I think the weird thing is that the governor acknowledged that much of the agita was caused by misinformation and deliberate exaggeration of what the bill did. But weirdly, or maybe not weirdly, it's politics. His statement was, it was basically too much of a hassle to try to talk to everybody and correct their misinformation or their mistaken assumptions about this law. So I'm going to veto it, and we'll start again on a special session this fall. So he was basically supported it, but didn't like the outcry, which may be good politics on his part. I don't know. But so this, so there is no new law about housing and zoning. It will be addressed in special session this fall. So.
Well, I know that the highlights I heard of it stressed me greatly, but I don't know that I had a complete understanding of it, so I never really formulated a deep perspective on it. So it's been vetoed. Here we are. I guess if this was being debated again, hopefully it would be on our agenda to discuss what was being debated if it's getting close to a bill that is being voted on, so that we could weigh in with our legislators about how we feel about it as a community and also as a commission.
John, there's no discussion on overriding veto, is there?
What's that? No,
No, okay.
I don't think they have the votes to override. I think it passed it passed something like well, there was no Republican support and several Democrats voted against it. It voted something like 20-14 in the Senate. I don't think there's enough. Yeah, I don't think there's enough to override.
Okay. Thank you. We have nothing for executive session. There was nothing for anything on audience and citizens. We missed you the first round. Okay, I think we're ready to, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? That would be unanimous.
Thanks, everyone.